Welcome to another episode of Trending Echoes. My name is Ilyas El-Hosseini and I'll be hosting today's great episode featuring Alexis Bonnell, Head of AI Adoption and Deployment and US National Labs Partnerships at OpenAI for Government.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here with us, Alexis. I think I'm just going to dive in right to the conversation and ask you a question. OpenAI often emphasizes AI for humanity. I want to ask, what does that mean on a governmental context?
I actually think AI for humanity is the most aligned in a governmental context. You know, the way I think about government is really to be there for the people, right? For the potential of the nation. And I think that's in such beautiful alignment with AI for humanity, right? The technology is so geared and focused on people, on people's potential. And I think really any government, the goal is to be able to maximize that potential. So I actually think of all industries or anything that AI could be focused on. The irony is that the focus for government is really, I think, more aligned than almost any other industrial alignment.
But what makes it so different to have this ensure diversity when it comes to AI adoption across governmental sectors? So,
yeah, well, I mean, I think first of all, you know, when you think about government, or you think about any industry or any nation, but particularly in government, there's two ways that you can look at that. I think the first is like how effective, efficient, innovative the government can be. And so there you're really looking at how is it that you take every public servant. And one thing I like to remind people of is that, you know, public servants, each one of us, and I say that because I'm a recovering public servant about 3 times over, but each one of us are actually chosen to be in that role based on our expertise, our experience, our style. And AI is a tool that actually complements that, right, and helps bring out more. So I think on one hand, the idea of using AI to make government more effective, that also means a difference in the lives of its citizens, right? Maybe you are not having to spend as much time on forms or on having to navigate, you know, important life elements. So births, deaths, all the ways, right, that we exist. But on the flip side, I also think where I see the next version of really government intervention, it won't just be making government more efficient, it will actually be in the mission. And I'll give you an example. You know, we could in the US work to help make the Small Business Administration more effective. But how magical it is, you know, would it be to be able to say, how do we make every entrepreneur, right, more effective, more able to be successful faster? And so I think with government, it's not just making government effective and efficient, it's actually how is it that we accelerate the mission of why that agency or entity exists and fundamentally change the experience of people around the world.
But don't you feel like, I want to talk more about, to make that happen, I think there should be like OpenAI or other entities when it comes to AI, they should focus more on the sense of trust. So how do you do that on your daily basis? How do you balance between, okay, all these developments, but creating trust?
Yeah. So, I mean, the most interesting thing about AI is that, or anything is, you actually can't trust it until you use it. Yeah. And so one of the things that I tell people, oftentimes people will say, is ChatGPT good at this? And I'll say, don't ask me, right? Like go and try and ask ChatGPT. And so I think sometimes, especially with AI, there is a perception that it's really advanced, it's really exotic, only the smartest people can do it, right? Or that, you know, you really have to be quite concerned about, you know, morality, ethics, and you do, but something I like to remind people is, you know, the people who are joining us today for this conversation, they've navigated every technology that's come, right? They'll navigate this one beautifully. And then I think also, you know, we really exist, and especially in government, we try to show up every day with intentionality. And so, you know, sometimes what we find in AI is people focus so much on the AI, on the machine, and they forget it's me. I'm in the driver's seat, right? And so the first element of trust is actually, do you trust yourself, right? Are your intentions, are you, you know, seeking balanced information? Are you coming, you know, with that spirit? And then I think obviously as you use it more, what you'll find is some things it does well and some things it doesn't do well, right? But really being able to test it, to try it, to not be afraid. You can't mess it up, right? You can't break it. And so just going in, I think, with a spirit of curiosity, I do think with trust as well, the goal is how much can we, as a company like OpenAI, make it as accurate as possible. And one of the things that really excited me over the last 6 months was as we brought out reasoning models. Because before, when someone would use ChatGPT, our goal was to get them a fast answer, right?
Yeah.
Get them, kind of satisfied, get their curiosity addressed. But now, with reasoning models and things like deep research, you can ask more complex things, but you can also see what the AI is doing to get to that answer. And so if the AI is taking a particular process or looking at a source that you don't find credible, you can actually see that, and then you can say, hey, I'd actually like you to look at these sources, or I would like these types of facts. And so again, I think it's always about making the tool better, smarter, but it's also about understanding that it is a human-machine team, and bringing that intentional curation is as important as the tool you're using itself.
But don't you feel like, okay, my question would be, because sometimes people fear being hand in hand with AI. I think there's still this bridge, or like there's this gap between us and the AI, and there's trust. But do you think that AI will be used throughout all sectors of the country, like for example, military?
I mean, I think the reality is that it has to be. And the reason I say that is because, and this is Alexis's definition, so not official OpenAI, but I really think about AI as a relationship with knowledge at speed and scale. One of the things we don't talk enough about when it comes to AI is, if you're using a tool like ChatGPT and you're asking a question, of course, what we're going to be trying to give you is, the best answer on, all of the information that exists. But I will give you a little insight on what my favorite way to use it, and really something that is absolutely game-changing. And that is, if you are in defense, if you are in food security or citizen assistance, the reality is you have a relationship with knowledge or information that is unique and specific to your role and mission. So I actually was the Chief Information Officer for the Air Force Research Laboratory in the US. So I was lucky enough to be able to support our Air Force elements and our Space Force elements. And you can imagine in the case of Air Force, we have fighter jets, right? We have different things. So as someone who worked on, a program like that, I don't have to just go to ChatGPT and say, tell me what we know globally. I can say, here are my programmatic information. Here's the information that I work with every day. And I can actually use AI to curate that. And so one of the things I tell people is that, part of building trust is also being aware of what is the information you trust, what is valid. And what I love about AI is you can actually, bring that in and create, a project or create a space where the only answers you get come from the information you trust. And I think that ability to say, I can take in the knowledge of the world, but I can also have a relationship with knowledge that is unique to myself, to my mission, I think is a great step that helps people realize it isn't just being told something, it's actually that active curation.
So what do you think are the top 3 capabilities, AI capabilities, that governments should start prioritizing now?
So I think the first one is like decision and policy, like scenario leaning. So you can imagine that if you're considering a particular policy, one of the first things you can do is go in and say, what are the potential foreseen or unforeseen negative or positive consequences, or the behaviors or incentives that this will create? And, I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, the administration in the US was looking at forgiving student loans. And, I think that is really interesting. But then there's a question of incentive, right? Are people going to make the right choices in their education? And one of the things I loved when that came out is I actually went to ChatGPT and said, what could this look like where it would kind of create a great civic alignment? And one of the ideas it came back with was, well, why don't we think about forgiving student loans, especially for roles that are civically minded? So you could imagine, nurse, teacher, firefighter. And I remember being struck at that time, like, oh, wow, that's really, that's really smart and really great. So I think the first is, as we have concepts for our nations, for the missions of government, try them out, interact with them. I think the second one, of course, is efficiency. I think one of the things that's hard is a lot of times government does require documentation or paperwork or process. But I think the more that we can try to use AI to kind of reduce the toil, not just on the government worker, but on the person experiencing government, and get more, I refer to it as like minutes on mission. I think that's really key. And then I think really, the third area, in some levels, I think we underestimate just the general availability of knowledge. We live in such a knowledge-rich world right now. And so I'll give you a very practical example. As a government worker, I'm also a whole human being, right? I got married, we had kids, all of these types of things. And so there would be moments where I needed to go and understand, well, what leave am I entitled to? And that actually, should be pretty easy, but as you might know, it isn't always easy. And so just being able to have a more straightforward and immediate, interaction with policies, with laws, with regulations, I think all of those are great examples.
Okay, you just stated that by the end of the day, you're human. You got married, you got kids. So I'm gonna focus more on your kids. Since you have so much experience and you're exposed so much to AI, the downside, the upside of AI, do you feel like as a parent, are you going to add regulations to your kids when it comes to the use of AI?
I feel like that's the role of parenting, right? Is like parental regulation. So, absolutely. And actually, my kids are now in their 20s. So I am actually a grandmother also for the first time. And so what's really interesting about that is I have, kids experiencing AI that are navigating work, navigating life, navigating college. So one of the things that I'm really clear on with my kids is that I think about AI as almost like a super processor, right? So whatever you intend, it has the opportunity to advance that quickly. But you have to be very specific about what you intend. And to give you an example, my daughter just started school. As you can imagine, there are a lot of universities that are worried about AI. They're worried that kids aren't going to learn, that they're going to kind of cheat. And then what I told my daughter is you have to have a vision for what your time and education is. If you want to be lazy, AI can make you super lazy, right? If you want to be creative, AI can make you and help you be super creative. But you really have to take that agency and ownership. So if you look at your education as a tick in the box, I'm trying to survive it, the reality is that you will probably achieve that, but you will also have consequences about what you didn't get for that investment. And so I think we're really entering this age of consequences. So what that means now, being the grandmother of Finley, who, it's quite interesting because I now have, a family member who will be AI native from the very beginning. And that kind of inspired me to co-write a kid's book. So specifically, kind of geared toward kids who are 6 to 12, because so many parents ask, what do I do? How do I get them ready for AI? And, and my best piece of advice is be a great parent, right? Focus on, helping make kind children, smart children, creative children. And the AI should just be a tool like any other tool to help you do that. And I think one of the things that I tried to emphasize with my co-author in the book is that it is about agency, right? It is about active choices. And when you introduce a tool, and for example, I could use a tool to explore, maybe as a young girl at 8 years old, I'm fascinated by science, right? I can use it to learn about science. I can use it to write stories about myself and my friends. But if I'm mad one day at one of my friends and I use AI to write something that's not nice, well, that has a consequence, right? That has a choice. And so I think, the most important thing I'm trying to do as I move forward as a mom, a wife, but now especially a grandmother, is to emphasize the fact that it is human-machine teaming. And again, in some cases, I actually think the human matters more than the machine.
How important do you think it is for governments to start embedding AI-focused classes to children today?
I actually believe it's paramount. The reality is we become good at what we practice, at what we do. And I think one of the most important things, it's not just the doing, but one of the elements that I actually really love about AI is the process of contextual thinking. So if you are going to do, looking to achieve something or do a particular query or prompt, and that's what we call when someone goes in, and puts in maybe a question or a goal into the AI. What I think is really important is being able to say, what is the relationship with knowledge I'm trying to have? And I'll give you an example. A lot of teachers, are quite concerned about, I used to give a book assignment and I knew that they would write it, right, and do the work. And one thing that I did recently, which I found really exciting, is I worked with a teacher. And, they gave the assignment and I said, okay, give them the assignment, let them use AI. But when they come back in the next day, have the students compare the prompts, the different things that they asked for. And you would be surprised by how energetic and, the exchange and the conversation was, because what you would see is a student would, approach the subject one way. Another student might use an entirely different frame. And the discussion about, well, why did you ask it that way? What was it? That's actually the interesting part of getting a different relationship with knowledge, or then looking at the outputs or outcomes and being able to debate and talk about, why is this accurate? Is it not? So I think sometimes we need to look at things like education. The goal isn't to create someone who's a walking encyclopedia, right? It is someone to be able to critically think, to problem solve, to be able to engage with others. And so I think for whether it's nations, whether it's government, really thinking about the type of character, skills, values, and then capabilities that you want to have in your workforce and your population. One of the things that when I was in my last role at the Air Force Research Lab is, instead of simply saying, do you need a platform? Do you need a tool? Do you need this? AI allowed me to sit down with leaders and say, what's the relationship with knowledge you want to have?
Okay.
How do you want your people to be different, right, in light of this technology? And I think sometimes that opportunity to really sit back and have a vision is something, for example, that I think the UAE has done really well.
How do you envision AI when it comes to transforming cooperation, diplomacy, when it comes to governments around the world?
Yeah, so much of cooperation and diplomacy is people understanding each other, right, and exchanging ideas. And so I think, one of the ways I can tell you that I use it is when I go into a new country or we're trying to understand, really how to be supportive to a country's vision for AI, is actually get to know the country, right? So to use the AI to understand policy or challenges, or be able to look quickly at the priorities of a nation. And I think, again, part of being great at diplomacy, to a certain extent, is being able to have empathy, for the partner, and as well as being able to understand, what is it that I want out of it? What is it that, that looks like kind of the right combination for myself, my country? And so I think this idea of, again, that is a knowledge journey, right? That is a kind of knowledge-based conversation. And so I think, trying to pay the respect to, for example, if we were negotiating something, it is respectful for me to try to understand about you, right? What might matter to you, what might matter to your people, and vice versa. And what excites me about AI is now you can do that with far less barriers, right? Far less work and toil. And that means I get to focus maybe more on getting to know you, right? Creating a friendship, and respecting and understanding where you're coming from. And I think that is really the base of so much great diplomacy that does happen.
I always have this question. AI, there's an upside to AI, but there's also a downside to AI when it comes to a governmental level, but also a society level. And there are many groups around the world, radical groups, that are now using AI tools to go into the minds of the youth. So what are your ideas on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, like safety and security is really one of the biggest challenges, especially when you have a technology that touches now hundreds of millions of lives, right? In some cases, billions if you put all of our work collectively as different labs together. And that comes with great responsibility. I think working when you have a tool, especially that isn't just touching an organization or a bureaucracy. Like this is something that every person has the opportunity to experience. And that also means that, to your point, not every person shows up with the intent, that is appropriate. So we have entire divisions, I have incredible colleagues who look every day and say, where is this being misused? How do we need to change that? Or are there safety rails? One great example is sometimes the AI actually helps get much better at things much faster than we expect. And so one is, in the bio realm or the health realm. And so being able to look at that and say, on one hand, this is great. We are probably going to make much faster medical discoveries. But it also means that we have to be very intentional about how someone may misuse, that information. And so what that really means is that we have to be vigilant. We have to understand, what is acceptable, what is not. And we have to see that as part of our responsibility in bringing this tool to bear. And I will tell you that this changes every day. And so sometimes, you can't get everything right, but it's about fixing it as quickly as possible when you haven't gotten that perfectly aligned. And, I would say one of the reasons that I joined OpenAI is because of how seriously, having been a public servant, having worked on really, critical and weighty issues, it was important to go somewhere where, yes, there was all of the amazing things AI could do, but that I had colleagues that every day kind of asked the hard questions as well.
Some people see AI tools, ChatGPT, and many other tools as biased tools, tools that stand by the interest of certain nations. How do you balance, or how does OpenAI balance itself by making it a tool that is for everyone?
Yeah. So what's actually interesting, I think the most interesting thing about humans is we change. And so this is, I think, a complicated element. And different nations, different societies we all, I think, in some levels want fairness, want dignity, but that's kind of the goal, but the way we do that might be different. So I think that means for tools like AI, it brings a couple of different things to bear. The first is, as I mentioned, that ability, we call it RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. And that is where you can, in fact, bring your information, your policies to bear. And so I think the ability to tune or to customize something that is appropriately, reflective, of a nation, of a culture, of its values is really important. But it is also, again, about that individual understanding, how to show up, how to use that. And then I think the reality is we will all continue to change. And so what worked today, what was acceptable today, in 5 years and 10 years may be different. And the most important thing is that we collectively, so not just, the AI tools, but we as humans have to be willing to adapt to that. And so I think the worst thing could be thinking about AI as some type of set in stone thing. AI is actually a learning technology. And so as we change, the AI actually has to change and grow as well. That being said, I think that there are times where, I used to work at Google, and there are times where you try to get it right. You try to kind of make it more sensitive, and actually you end up getting not factual results or not good results. And so I think you do have to be quite disciplined to be able to say your interaction with the tool needs to be able to honor like your experience, and my interaction, with the tool needs to also be able to meet me there. And that's actually one of the most amazing things about AI, is that you have this incredible experience, this is incredible expertise. I have incredible experience, incredible expertise, but we are not the same.
Yes.
And the fact that for the first time we have a technology that actually can be different and can show up for you and can show up for me differently, that is, I think, the unspoken magic, about artificial intelligence.
Just recently, you participated in the Trend's second annual conference on artificial intelligence, and this year's theme was tech diplomacy in the MENA region. Can you just give me a highlight on how it felt like to be in a session with people from different entities, with different backgrounds, and just talked about AI?
Yeah, so first of all, it was amazing to be back I think I mentioned to you that I was lucky enough to, live in Dubai in 2006, to live in Abu Dhabi around 2010. And first of all, it is absolutely amazing, right, to see how the nation grew. And sitting in the audience for the event, I took a picture and I sent it to my husband, and I was like, guess where I am? He's like, oh, you're back home where we were, when we first met and first got married. And I was like, yeah. And so I think in some levels, I've always appreciated that the UAE is a place where so many different people can come from so many different cultures and thrive. I think particularly, I have the amazing honor of being on the panel with Bilal and Talal and Mona. And so, the first thing is just being able to listen and to learn. I think sometimes we forget that it almost feels like a luxury to be able to reflect and listen to different views. And so for me, I think being able, Talal was incredible. What a great vision, being able to be exposed to something like trends, which really is about having your finger kind of on the pulse of what's happening. And then I think in the diplomacy space, for me, it was personally exciting because coming from a background in international development with the UN, with defense, and then, of course, with technology, it's the perfect marriage, right? So it was all of my geek out subjects in one place. So, it was incredible. And maybe, hopefully, I'll get invited back. I don't know. But, hopefully I will.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
Because the theme was tech diplomacy in the MENA region, and the UAE was among the first countries that signed partnerships with OpenAI.
First.
Yes. Where do you see the UAE in the next 5 years or 10 years when it comes to AI?
So I think the UAE will be one of the first AI native countries. I think one of the things that's so impressive is that they understand intrinsically that AI is a relationship with knowledge. And I think you can, number one, just the ambition, right, to make sure that every person has the ability to have this kind of supercharger for their potential. But I think also recognizing that this is going to be about education, that this is going to be about not just talking about AI, but actually teaching, getting people's hands on. And I think what we will find is that the generation that is coming up now will function far differently than we do. And I'll give you an example. I have grandkids. I've been around for a while. And so, when I think about, for example, management, for me, management was always managing people, kind of managing small teams, large teams. I think one of the things that's been really fascinating for me to watch as, again, my kids maybe in their 20s and even, earlier than that, now that you have things like agents or you have deep research, what I'm actually seeing is that young people are getting more effective management experience. And what I mean by that is, as a manager, your goal is usually to drive outputs or outcomes. Now, if you think about it, my 20-year-old daughter manages 20 plus agents, right? Going out and doing different jobs, getting, different information for her. So she is actually actively experiencing and becoming experienced in managing outcomes and outputs and not just people. And so I think that, when we think about a decade ahead from now, in fact, we're just starting to see people put things like custom GPTs or things that they've created in their, in AI tools as on their resume, which is really exciting, right? Because all of a sudden you're starting to see that it isn't just the AI over there, it is the AI and the way that I have teamed with that technology to be more, to bring more, right, to potentially an employer. So, I think what will be very interesting is, and maybe a challenge even for someone, kind of my age and at the amount of time I've been on the planet, is to understand that, expectations are going to go up, adaptability is going to go up, and our children are actually going to need to be able, to keep up with, with the change in the world, the unprecedented amount of information in the world. They're going to need different things that we didn't have to have. And so I think, when I look at the UAE and I look at the vision, in some ways it is such a manifestation of respect, right, for the next generation, and really trying to say, what can I do now, right? Maybe for me and my grandmother, mindset for Finley, but maybe for the UAE as the caretaker, right, of their people and of their potential. I just think this idea of saying, I'm truly going to invest in you, right? I'm going to do it not 10 years from now, I'm going to do it now. It will be very interesting to compare nations that have made that, type of bold mood and those maybe that haven't in 5 to 10 years.
A question I want to ask you, Alexis, is how much do you personally trust AI?
So I will tell you, like some things, again, as I mentioned, it's really good at. Some things I've learned, like it's not good at that, or maybe it's not good at that yet. So I'll give you a couple examples that, of course I use it for my work. I use it to prepare. Sometimes, I don't know if you ever feel like this as someone in kind of media and creative space, sometimes you have something you want to explore, but you don't know where to start, right? There's that blank page and that's daunting, right? That can feel like, where do I start? So I love, very eloquently going to AI and like, I'm thinking about this and maybe, and just having almost like a partner, right? To bounce off my sometimes good, sometimes silly ideas. But honestly, I also use it for the most mundane things. And I say that because you're a whole human being. I'm a whole human being. And so in addition to the work we do, the conversation that we're having now, I also have to figure out what we're going to eat tonight for dinner, right? I also have to figure out, how I'm going to train our new puppy to sit and stay. And I say that because, this is one of the most exciting things about AI is it isn't just a work tool, or a fun social media thing. I think about it, and this might sound a little strange, I think about it as like my human operating system, right? Or maybe my human optimization system. And so if I'm in that domain of I've got to get dinner on the table, I open my fridge, I take a picture, and I say, based on this, what can I make in 10 minutes, right? Because sometimes I'm just tired. There's a lot of things. Or for whatever reason, our pantry and our freezer is full, and yet I keep going to the store. And so, last week, I took a picture of my freezer and I said, all right, I want to have my freezer empty in 3 months. What can I make? Another one that a colleague just did, and I think it's actually important to have fun, to do things that aren't always serious. So one of the things that she wowed us all with is she went to the local store and was buying a watermelon and took a picture and asked ChatGPT which watermelon is going to be the sweetest. And it told her, it actually said, the bottom one on the left, that's the one that's going to be the sweetest. And she was like, okay, but how do I know this is right? And she's fabulous. And so she bought every watermelon, put an X on the one ChatGPT said it was the sweetest. She bought every watermelon, so 8 watermelons, and went home and did a taste test. And actually, ChatGPT got it right. She said it was the sweetest watermelon. But I think sometimes, when we think about a technology or a relationship, and you mentioned, that people can be scared or they can be anxious, then don't use it for anything scary or anxious. I'll give you a little insight into training people on AI. When I was introducing AI into the Department of Defense and into very, senior roles and leaders, and maybe leaders who are a bit nervous, right? The number one thing that I found I could give them as a first prompt was write a love letter. And if you think about it, here people have very important jobs, very serious jobs, but they're also human, right? They also want to be a good spouse or a good partner. And so, my first advice to someone with AI is just be you. It's okay to try it and to have fun with it. And much like in children, start with play. You will find, the path of how it exists in those different domains, but don't be afraid just to start.
I had a conversation with one of my teammates because my team is very diverse. And one time she held her phone and she was like, Star. And then she asked her the question, I'm like, who's Star? Is it a new AI tool? She's like, no, I gave ChatGPT a name. I call her Star. It's not what you say to ChatGPT, it's how you say it to ChatGPT. And I was just like amazed. And I'm like, do you depend on ChatGPT that much? She's like, yes. So many argue that ChatGPT is now reducing the progress rate when it comes to critical thinking, patience, dependency. So what are your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts are actually exactly opposite of that. And I say that because, typically as you're learning to use an AI tool, if I'm using ChatGPT, oftentimes I don't have my thoughts perfectly elegant or optimized. And so what happens is isn't so much, I tell people, it isn't about necessarily getting the first answer or a perfect answer. It's actually about the process of really reflecting on what it is you're trying to achieve. And I'll give you one of my favorite, this is research I did before I was at OpenAI, but I was looking at the AI system that I was working on at the time. And we had a lot of different kind of cohorts and groups using the tool. And one of the groups that, and now are you a mom or no kids yet? Okay, so I will tell you. One of the things, if you choose to have a family, that will happen is, as a mom, I kind of have to develop these skills. And so, moms are particularly good at things like, let me ask that question in a different way. Like, I'm not sure my 6-year-old is giving me the full story. Or, and what we found really interesting in that study is that, moms actually go from being basic queryers or prompters to actually quite advanced queryers or prompters. And the reason for that is not because they ask the perfect question the first time. It's because they go back and forth. And actually the process of the contextual thinking actually walks someone through what is important to this in me. And so what you'll see is that, especially also as people have more time with the tool, they will realize, like, I can ask for sources, right? Or I can ask for facts. Or maybe I want to approach this question and I want both sides of the story. And with things like social media or other tools, it really exists and reinforces maybe what you might know. And so I think being able to use AI to say, well, I know I feel this way, but how might someone feel that is opposite and why? And that opportunity to actually have that intellectual curiosity. So I would say that if you look at AI as simply an answer machine, you're kind of missing the point. And what you should be doing is actually going in and saying, I am being intentional about learning and balancing, kind of this question. So again, it's almost back a little bit to, like, if you want to be lazy, it can help you be super lazy. If you want to be thoughtful, it can be an incredible partner, right, to kind of spar with you in that reflection.
I'm personally pro ChatGPT. I don't remember the last time I didn't come to work and use ChatGPT, even on a personal level. ChatGPT, like when I ask it a question now, and when it gives me an answer, edits a caption or things I need to do on social media, to be like, okay, this is how I would write it. But throughout your style of writing, I think you would like it more to be written like this. So it amazes me how fast it grabs information and reflects it on how it answers.
Well, and I think too, one of the things that is always interesting about focusing on AI adoption is it isn't just like use ChatGPT. What I often find is that someone, will only understand or have only experienced a small amount of it. So as an example, we have a function inside of ChatGPT called Canvas. So what you'll see is a lot of people will go and they'll get an answer and they'll kind of copy and paste it into like a different thing. It's like, you can just open Canvas and edit, right? Or you could say, just change this paragraph. Or, being able to use tools like deep research to really be able to get information. I think one of the things, I don't know if you've tried browser yet, but that's where you can, in essence, take ChatGPT with you as you're searching the web on your own for information. And so I think part of my goal is, and my colleagues at OpenAI are incredible, right? Because every week there's something like, it does this now. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm still like not caught up with what it did like 2 weeks ago. But I think, in the way that your colleague thinks about it, I actually don't think about ChatGPT as one thing. I think about it as like my posse or my crew or my gang, because it, when I'm needing to be a great chef, like there's part of it that does that. When one of the things I've done recently, now that Finley is born and I'm a grandma, is I have started every night to go in and write a bedtime story for him. So he can't understand those yet, but just being able to go in, and to your point, because I have a project in ChatGPT, which is like Finley's book. And so every night I can go in, it remembers what we did before, right? I really, really hope he likes dinosaurs. He may not, because right now we have a lot of stories about dinosaurs. But being able to go in and to to just exercise that part of me every night, to be able to go in and to edit. And guess what? If it turns out that he likes fire trucks, well, I can go back and say, hey, hey team, make this all about fire trucks, right? And instead of having to redo every story, it will be able to adapt to that. And so I think that those are the types of ways that I love using it.
To close off today's conversation, I think I want to ask you one last question. Sure. What would your advice be to the youngsters today when it comes to the usage of AI?
Yeah. So I think my advice, the first one is use it. Get comfortable with it and really understand what it is good at and what it isn't good at. I would also say use it to exist in the world, not separated from the world. And so, one of the things that my husband and I do is we use it to plan a date night, right? We use it to plan how we experience the world around us. And then the third thing I would say is take the time and pay the respect to yourself of really thinking about, and this is something I actually do still on a yearly basis, who am I? What do I want to be known for? How do I want to show up in the world? And when I use a tool, whether it's driving my car or whether it's using something like ChatGPT, am I using that in a way that honors that vision that I have for myself, that honors the way that I want to show up for other people, right? Or the mission of my organization. And I think sometimes we make assumptions about that, and being really intentional about it. And then what I think that does, it allows you to take a tool like ChatGPT and really make it in service of you and your family and your nation and your potential, and not just a technology.
Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being in another episode of Trending Echoes.
I'm so proud to be here, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.